And now I'd like to introduce our moderator for the evening. Matt Whitaker currently serves as our DC University of Chicago Club president, and he chairs the Chicago Booth DC Entrepreneurs Advisory Group. Following his graduation from Chicago Booth in 1995, he worked for the management consulting firm A.T. Kearney and Capital One before joining a startup company, iFinance. Matt started a payment processing company in 2002, which he sold in October of 2007. Last December, he acquired Intelligent Office of Alexandria, which provides virtual office services, including live answer telephone receptionist services for over 80 companies. So please join me in welcoming Matt.
Thanks, Rachel. I'm not used to such a formal introduction. I worked today on the speakers' bios and forgot, oh yeah, they're going to introduce me as well. In my role as the University of Chicago DC Club president, I want to acknowledge all the work that Rachel has done. She stepped forward. Now we have a careers chair. We have a quarterly careers event. Many other cities don't have that. We have that just because Rachel stepped forward and volunteers her time. So if you're sitting in the audience and you want to know how you can get involved, just see me or any of our other club officers, and we'll find some way to harness your energy. But thanks to Rachel. And thanks to everyone. What a great turnout tonight. Many of you know we do a monthly meeting, which we call the Entrepreneurs Advisory Group. And we typically get 25, 30, 35 people there. This whole event started over the summer when I was in Chicago, and I was attending the HAPAC Entrepreneurship Seminar at the university. And there I learned that Professor Waverly Deutsch had just relocated to DC, and she's now commuting to Chicago. So naturally, my first thought is, how can I get her in front of the group? We meet in a conference room that seats maybe 45 people when it's packed, and I thought we're going to blow out that room. So it so happens that thanks to Careers Month, there was a little money available. Rachel was agreeable to let us hijack her event or combine events. And so we've got this great space and great snacks. It's a little step up from the pizza we usually get at our monthly meetings, but I think this group can handle that. So a little more about our monthly meeting. Who has attended? Can I just get a show of hands? So many of you know what it's all about. Every month we find an entrepreneur in the DC area. We invite them, him or her, to come in and talk about their business and some of the problems, issues, opportunities that they face right now. And the group serves as kind of an informal roundtable. We talk about whatever issues come up during the evening. It's really fascinating. I've been chairing that group since March 2002. So we've had over 100 entrepreneurs come through in that time. And in fact, some of them are here tonight. I want to acknowledge a few people who have spoken to the group. Stu Whitaker, way back in the day. Leslie Downey. Lynn Salvo is here from Math Tree. She spoke about a year ago. Two of our panelists, Ed Walters and Tien Wong, have both spoken to the group. And I saw Julia Scrivens on our list, Borrow My Husband. I don't see her here tonight. So maybe there are some future speakers in the group, and I hope that some of you who have never come out before will check it out one month. It's a free event. And while I'm on the subject, I want to give special thanks to an alum who's not here. Mark Fitzgerald is a JD MBA and a partner at the law firm Wilson Sonsini, Goodrich Rosati. They host us every month. They buy pizza, they buy soft drinks, and we enjoy their space. And since the time we moved downtown, our attendance went from a dozen or so to the 25 or 35 that we get every month now. So come on out. The next event will be in December, and you can find out about it by either getting on my email list or, better yet, join our Facebook group. We started a Facebook group that's called something like Chicago Booth DC Entrepreneurs Advisory Group. If you can't find it on Facebook, find a way to get a hold of me, and I'll make sure you get it. So join the group. We'll be posting future speakers and other events there. So a couple of other shout-outs. I just want to acknowledge the university staff that's here. Matt Donato wrote the check for this event. Matt is with Alumni Relations, Alumni Career Services, and he's in charge of Career Month. Nancy Beach runs our University of Chicago office here in D.C. at 1730 Pennsylvania Avenue. Stop by for a Coke sometime. Abby Basic is here. I think she's still at the table. And Sarah Toussaint, I never get Sarah's title right, but she runs the alumni clubs in Boston, Philadelphia, and DC. So she is our main liaison to the university. So thanks for all the support we get to the university. That's why we can have such a great club. That and our volunteers. Okay, I'm probably talking too long, so I just want to make a couple of points about entrepreneurship. The first one is entrepreneurs come in all shapes and sizes, from solo practitioners, family businesses, franchisees, to the high-tech venture-backed startups and high-tech venture-backed successful companies that grow into billion-dollar valuations. So our guest for the night, our speaker, Professor Deutsch, really focuses on the high-growth companies. So when we staffed the panel, we looked for companies of that type, and we have a great panel for you tonight to show for that. But don't forget, if you're sitting in the audience thinking, can I do this? Can I be an entrepreneur? Well, there are plenty of successful entrepreneurs that run solo practice consultancies. One of our Chicago alums runs a cheese shop in Delray, Jill Erber, who many people know. I myself am now a franchisee, so there's lots of different ways to be an entrepreneur. And then the second point I wanted to make, which will probably come out tonight, is when you read about successful entrepreneurial ventures, usually those articles are written after the success has been achieved. So as a reader, you sit there thinking, I can do that, or I should have thought of that, or I had that idea 5 years ago, if only I had done it. Well, what those articles don't usually mention is all the pain and suffering that goes into the success. Thousands of hours of work, months or years without a paycheck, putting your family fortunes in peril. So we'll probably hear some of those stories tonight. That's what really goes behind entrepreneurship. So now I'm going to introduce very briefly our panel, and then I'm going to turn the floor over to our speaker, Professor Waverly Deutsch. So we've got a panel tonight consisting of 3 entrepreneurs. I'm going to try to be brief because they're going to give you a little bit in their own words when they take the floor. Tony Martinez is the co-founder and CEO of Sterling National Medical Services, a medical practice consulting and billing service provider. Tony is also the co-founder and CEO of a web and mobile education company. And previously, in 2002, Tony co-founded and served as CEO of California Medical Disposal, a company which he sold in 2006. Tony graduated from Stanford, where he majored in industrial engineering, and he has an MBA from the Chicago Booth School of Business. Ed Walters is CEO and co-founder of Fastcase, an online legal research software company based here in Washington, D.C. Under Ed's leadership, Fastcase has grown to one of the world's largest legal publishers, currently serving more than 400,000 subscribers from around the world. And Ed earned his AB in government from Georgetown, and he earned his JD from the University of Chicago, I believe in 1996. And finally, Mr. Tien Wong, our only non-UFC graduate on the panel, but I'm sure you'll agree with me that we're quite lucky to have him. Couldn't get in. Someone needs to talk to the admissions committee if that's the case. Tien is currently the chairman and CEO of Lore Systems, a Silver Spring, Maryland-based IT professional services company. He's also chairman and chief executive officer of Opus 8, a Silver Spring, Maryland-based private investment firm specializing in middle market buyouts, private equity, and venture capital investments. In 1991, Tien co-founded and served as CEO of CyberRep until its acquisition in 2003. At the time of its acquisition, CyberRep was one of the largest privately held CRM outsourcing companies in the world, with 2,300 employees and $80 million in revenue. Tien is also one of the most well-known and beloved entrepreneurs in the DC area, as he's a frequent panelist and guest speaker all over the area. You can't read the local business news without running into Tien eventually. So that'll be our panel, and they will take the stage after we hear a little bit from Professor Waverly Deutsch. Waverly is clinical professor of entrepreneurship at Chicago Booth. Her research focuses on the execution issues entrepreneurs face as they grow their businesses, especially marketing, sales, operations, and team building. She's currently collaborating with Professor Craig Wertman on the Entrepreneurial Execution Project. In addition to teaching, Waverly is an active angel investor and advisor to startups. There's a typo on this, Waverly. It said in the Chicago area, but I'm going to change that to DC, I hope, in the future. And she also works with not-for-profit venture IC Stars, helping young inner-city adults prepare for careers in the high-tech sector. So please help me welcome Professor Waverly Deutsch.
Thank you, Matt. Like you, I'm not accustomed to a formal introduction. Normally, when I walk in front of a group like this, it's students who already know me, and it is a pleasure to see so many familiar faces from the HAPEC seminar and from my class over the years. What an honor to have you here tonight when you could be home watching the Redskins take on the Eagles, which hopefully will be more entertaining than what we do here tonight, but not too much. Hopefully we'll have some fun here tonight. And I never in a million years thought I would be speaking at the National Press Club. I feel obligated to mention policy somewhere this evening. So while I'm sure you'd rather be hearing from the entrepreneurs, Matt put me up to a brief lecture on entrepreneurship. So I want to talk a little bit about entrepreneurship and what it means to the economy, and particularly about the entrepreneurs who really impact our lives and the future of our employment and innovation. Because while I completely agree with Matt that the term lifestyle entrepreneur seems very well, let's say denigrating to very hardworking, very creative entrepreneurs who start small businesses and really do create a lot of value. The vast majority of new jobs and new innovations come to market through a very specific set of entrepreneurs like those we're going to meet tonight. So we all talk about the statistics of entrepreneurs, right? Small businesses, the businesses founded by entrepreneurs, the businesses that generate over $10,000 in revenue per year and have under 500 employees, they account for 50% of the private sector employment. Half of the people who don't work for the government work in a small business. Right? They also support half of the non-farm GDP. So it's a huge number. And they account for 75% of all net new job creation. And medium-sized companies account for the rest because, as we all know, Fortune 1000's been shrinking. Outsourcing, offshoring, right-sizing, downsizing, however you want to describe it. They are not creating jobs for us. Entrepreneurs are the ones who introduce new products and services to market. Large companies are risk-averse. They have to protect shareholder value. They have to protect current customer bases. They don't go out of their way to launch something crazy and new. They wait for the entrepreneurs to do it and then buy them. Right? So, as a proxy for innovation, small businesses generate 13 to 14 times the number of patents per employee that large companies generate. Now remember, they make up 50% of the employment, so that's literally, on a per patent basis, 13 to 14 times the number of patents filed by small businesses than by large businesses. Right. So you think about these large companies, IBM, Abbott, Baxter, GM, with research labs and scientists dedicated to innovation, and it's the little guy who's actually bringing new products and services to market. In this time of, I guess we're calling it a recovery, it's interesting to think about what $1 million in the hands of an entrepreneur does. $1 million in the hands of a hedge fund manager, and I'm going to get in trouble with some of you here, $1 million in the hands of a hedge fund manager goes and looks for derivatives and shorts and money products to try to find a way to grow. Very rarely does it get down to jobs and supplies and people, and entrepreneurs invest over $300 billion directly into the economy by hiring people and buying things. So they're a huge impact on the economy, and we all know this because we've heard from the current administration and from the previous administration and from, all the economic experts that entrepreneurs are going to save us. Small businesses are going to save us. They create the new jobs, right? We need to do something to encourage small businesses. But there's a little bit of myth in that as well. I don't want to offend anybody, but the average entrepreneur is a loser. Loser. What we want to make sure that we understand is the difference between the average entrepreneur and the entrepreneurs that we want to be. The average entrepreneur is not innovative. Over 50% of sole proprietors and entrepreneurs starting businesses say they're not bringing anything new to market. They're just doing what they did when they were employed, but doing it for themselves. And that lack of innovation makes it very difficult to compete. The average entrepreneur makes less money than if he or she remained employed and has fewer or no benefits. So the average entrepreneur, their business fails about 70% of the time. Not great odds. So adding money to, say, the Small Business Administration's loan portfolio to help Joe the plumber go out on his own, and I'll use Joe the plumber as an example, no offense to Joe who's not named Joe, the plumber who's not a plumber, because he's sort of a quintessential example of the type of entrepreneur that is a loser. If he goes from working for a master plumber to working for himself, the chances are better than 70% that he will create 0 jobs except his own. They're greater than 70% that he'll make less money than if he had stayed employed by the master plumber. And his odds of going bankrupt go up dramatically. That's not the entrepreneur who creates all the jobs. That's not the entrepreneur who is going to fix the economies of this country and all other countries. There's a very select set of entrepreneurs. They're called high expectation entrepreneurs who believe that their companies are going to create jobs. About 8% of the entrepreneurs think they'll create 20, 50, 100 jobs. Most entrepreneurs, more than half of all entrepreneurs, a lot more than half of all entrepreneurs, expect to be sole proprietors, which is great. It's a great way to make a living. But that's not where the impact on the economy is going to come from. The high expectation entrepreneurs create the wealth and are more likely than other entrepreneurs to be wealthy. Having created wealth, they get some of it themselves, and to drive innovation. They are responsible for nearly all the net new jobs. And by net new jobs, what I mean is, remember that 70% that's failing? As they go out of business, they're destroying jobs. So small businesses actually destroy jobs as quickly as they create them. It's these high growth, high expectation entrepreneurs who create all the jobs. Economists frequently call them gazelles. They're the most successful companies in their industries. They're growing faster than their industries, and they're creating a bunch of jobs. So what does this mean for us from a policy perspective? See, I told you I had to mention it, right? We have to figure out, how do we identify and support the high expectation entrepreneurs? Access to capital in the form of debt is definitely a part of it. Not little tiny loans to Joe the plumber, but access to meaningful loans to invest in capital, to invest in inventory, to invest in R&D. We also have to discover who finds these entrepreneurs. And the answer is that many of these entrepreneurs are identified for us by investors. Sophisticated angel investors and venture capitalists who seek out these entrepreneurs who are going to grow the large companies because they can make money backing them. So now, as investors, we'd like to see some policies that will help us be able to spend more money. As an angel myself, I do speak for myself, spend more money helping these entrepreneurs who are creating these meaningful companies that are going to impact the economy. And the government put out a sort of a one-time only, almost secret benefit that if you invest in a company that qualifies as entrepreneurial by certain rules between now and December 31st, those investments will be exempt from capital gains tax. Now, how many of you have heard of this? Right? Ed's heard of it. Ed's hoping to take advantage of it. Right? 2 people in this room have heard of this. This is exactly the kind of policy that's going to help these high expectation entrepreneurs get started and be innovative. Now, what makes high expectation entrepreneurs so able to innovate? And this is going to go a little counter to some of your booth training for my booth alum here. And that is that they actually think differently. You know, we always think about the stereotypical aspects of entrepreneurial personalities. You know, they're charismatic and they can sell and they're visionary and they're creative, right? But if you just take a list of characteristics, it turns out that statistically speaking, entrepreneurs are no more or less likely to have those kinds of characteristics. We just see them that way because that's the way the media presents them. So a researcher out of Darden decided she would look at really how do entrepreneurs think? And she created one of the most interesting studies I've ever heard of. She wanted to identify what she called expert entrepreneurs, people who had done it multiple times, who had grown businesses with tens and hundreds of millions of dollars in sales, who had had at least one IPO process. She identified a little over 200 of them. She got a sample size of about 35 of them to actually do a scientific experiment with her. Now, here's how I imagine this took place, right? Because these are very successful people, who are very busy. But one thing we know about entrepreneurs, and you'll see it up here, is that they actually like to talk about themselves. So they're very willing to share their story. So here's what I imagine. I imagine she was like, we're doing this research, we'd like to get some of your time, and oh, absolutely, I love to help with the research, and absolutely, come on in. And she would go in, and they would say, okay, so let me tell you about my story. And she'd say, now wait, I want to hear about your story, but I want to do something else first. And she had a 17-page problem set of 10 decisions that entrepreneurs and small businesses go through that she wanted them to work through out loud. And she recorded every word they said. And then she used heuristics to chunk those words into ways of thinking and look for patterns in the ways they thought. And she learned that they use logic differently than the rest of us. So what I wanted to do is introduce you to entrepreneurial logic, otherwise called effectual logic. So the way you think about a business problem or the types of logic that you use is really dependent on how much you believe in the power of prediction, that A leads to B leads to C leads to D. So if we're trying to predict E, if we can do as much research as possible on A, B, C, and D, we're going to get E really accurate, versus how much you rely on your ability to control the environment, to make things happen. Makes sense, right? So if I said to you, I have this fabulous new thingamabob that makes presenters super productive, right? And I think people are going to use this, but I don't know for sure. What would you probably say is our first step? Go out and do some market research, right? Let's go ask people. Okay? Do you need a thingamabob? Would a thingamabob be helpful to you? What features would a thingamabob need? Many of you have done market research. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Okay? This is a heavy emphasis on prediction. So if you believe heavily in prediction, you're using causal logic, you're using analytical logic, and that logic tells you, do research. Get data, make predictions. Okay, so I do my research. Looks like there's going to be a market for thingamabobs. So I make thingamabobs. And I go out and try to sell them. Manas, do you need a thingamabob? No, thank you. Matt, do you need a thingamabob? No, thank you. Tony, do you need a thingamabob? No, thank you. All right, now, if I don't believe I have any control over this market, and I'm using causal logic, then all I can do is figure I must have done something wrong in my research and go back and do the research again. If I have the feeling that I have some control over the market, what I'll do is I'll persist. I'll frame it a little bit differently, but I'll keep going. Ed, you want a thingamabob? Bernard, you want a thingamabob? Anybody want a thingamabob? Okay, and then I'll find the people who want a thingamabob. That's called visionary logic. Your job is to keep going and to make that valuable future that you foresee. A long time ago, a very smart man named Bill Gates was laughed at when he said the mission of Microsoft was a PC on every desk, a PC in every home. Everybody said, what? 90% of people in the world are never going to need a computer. What are they going to do with a computer? Microsoft persisted. Bill Gates used every trick in the book, some fair, some not fair, to make his vision reality. He believed in the research that said technology was going to disperse into the world, and he persisted in driving it forward. All right, that's if I believe in the power of prediction. If I'm not so big on the power of prediction, I might skip the market research. I might go, Manas, you want a thingamabob? No. Matt, you want a thingamabob? No, I don't really want a thingamabob, but I would like a who's he what's it. Oh, well, now I've found my market. It's not thingamabobs, it's who's he what's it. So I'll go back and I'll adjust. I'll start making who's he what's it instead of thingamabobs. Okay? That's adaptive logic. We don't have a whole lot of control, and we can't really predict things, so our job as entrepreneurs is to be super flexible, experiment until we figure out exactly what the customer needs, and then give them that. Adaptive logic. The last kind of logic is effectual logic. And that is that I neither believe in the power of prediction, nor am I concerned with finding out what the market wants and adjusting to it. I'm going to make the market. I have an idea, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go out and I'm going to identify a partner, JP, and JP and I together are going to create this vision, and JP is going to bring in Bernadette as a stakeholder, and we're going to bring in Margot as a stakeholder, and we're going to make this market. Effectual entrepreneurs don't identify opportunities, they create them. They don't believe that markets are inevitable trends. They believe that markets are what people do and how people respond to things. Now, it's a little bit different, isn't it, from what we were taught at Booth? It's so different, in fact, that when this professor, Saraswati, gave her test to MBAs, 75% of the MBAs used effectual thinking 0% of the time. They used no effectual thinking. We all have these tools and different sets of these tools, and we use them in blended fashion. But the MBAs, not a lot of effectual thinking. Heavy, heavy reliance on the causal logic. When she gave this test to the expert entrepreneurs, they relied very heavily on effectual logic. Several of them used only effectual thinking. 2/3 of them used effectual thinking 75% of the time. And this came out in things like, well, somebody might think it would be a good idea to do a market research study, but I think that's just a waste of time. I'd find a customer to build it with. Or somebody might think you could learn a lot from focus groups, but this early with no market, you really can't learn anything from focus groups. That kind of language was really common across these really, really successful entrepreneurs. We have to believe, apparently, some of the implications of this are, we have to believe that we can build this market. We have to believe that we have some level of control over this market to really take a risk. Because really, really successful businesses involve risk. And they involve innovation. And one of the most telling things that I've ever heard from a venture capitalist Tim Draper said of Draper Fisher, you know what we discovered after 20 years in business? If all 10 of our partners agreed on a deal, it failed every time. I don't know, maybe there were just too many people chasing that opportunity, or it was too obvious to have real value. He said, if one partner was so passionate about a deal that we let him do it even though the rest of us didn't buy into it, it failed every single time. But our biggest home runs, the optimal number of partners, was 2. It had to have so much risk that 8 of us didn't think it was going to work to get a really big home run. So that risk that Matt talked about is really part of high expectation, high growth entrepreneurship. So who uses this kind of logic? Well, we talked about the expert entrepreneurs. Interestingly, novice entrepreneurs use a blend. They have to, because as we talk about endlessly in my class, if you need to know everything that's going to happen and exactly how it's going to work, you will never start a business. You will kill yourself with analysis paralysis. So novice entrepreneurs have to believe that they can overcome these odds, that they can create this value. And as their companies grow, they stay heavily dependent on effectual logic, even more so. Angel investors use a lot of an element of effectual logic, which is called gut feel. Angel investors are the people who invest really early, before proof of concept, before data, and they very often go on gut feel. Young VCs, new firms, rely heavily on causal types of logic, and it's interesting because Professor Kaplan at Booth has done a lot of research on the lemming effect of VCs, because they all figure if someone else has invested, it must be a safe investment. He says this actually is good for getting a lot of money into hot spaces, but the ones that are late to the party, they just fall off the cliff without anything. As VCs get more experienced, they start to use more effectual techniques when making their investment decisions. Corporate managers, small business managers, not so much. Part of management is getting as much data as you can and minimizing risk. So they use far less effectual logic. So what are the secrets of effectual logic? What are the principles of effectual logic? First, the bird in the hand principle. Don't start with an opportunity. Start with who you are, who you know, your access to resources, what you're passionate about. Create the opportunity, don't identify it. The affordable loss principle, and this one is really important for you would-be entrepreneurs. Invest what you can afford to lose. Virtually every successful entrepreneur I have ever spoken to knew what their backup plan was, knew that there was a chance that this wasn't going to succeed, and knew when they were going to cut it off, that they had invested enough time. Not the potential upside. The crazy quilt principle, this is probably my favorite. Entrepreneurs hear a lot of no. Oh, that's the dumbest idea I've ever heard of. Oh, that's never going to work. Oh, you've got 17 competitors doing something really similar. As you go around talking about your idea, talking about your concept, talking about your business, some people are going to say, hey, actually, I know somebody that would be really valuable for, and I'll make an introduction for you. You know what? I think that could really work. I'd be happy to give you some advice. Yeah, I will take a chance on you. I will invest some money in you. Those are self-selected stakeholders. Trust in them, not deep competitive analysis. The lemonade principle, we all know that one. Nothing is going to go the way you plan. That's part of it. Deal with it, leverage it, don't avoid it. You can't. And then the pilot in the plane principle. And I really like this one because I will never, ever fly a computer-driven airplane, ever. Because Captain Sully lands on the river, a computer doesn't. You know what I mean? right? That the future is what people do, that markets are what people do. They're not based on inevitable trends. And with that, I'd like to introduce you to some people who I would certainly deem expert entrepreneurs. We can hear some of their reaction to this and get to know them a little bit better. Come on up, gentlemen. So what I'm going to ask them to do is to go a little deeper into what their businesses are and also talk a little bit about how they got into entrepreneurship. You guys can feel free to comment on what you heard if you feel so moved. And then I'll ask them some questions and we'll open it up to you. Ed, will you start us off?
Yeah, sure. My name's Ed Walters. I started Fastcase 11 years ago last week. The world's law library would not fit on this floor of the National Press Club. We're going to put it on these. Right now, law in North America is about a $6 billion market. It's owned effectively by two duopolists. They've overcharged for this. They use crappy software. It was all built in the 80s. This market needs about a 15% player, like Apple Computer is to PCs. Fastcase is going to be to legal publishing. That's what we're doing.
And how did you get into entrepreneurship?
I was a lawyer in a law firm here in town, using crappy software and paying about $1 million to each of those duopolists. One of my clients, and I won't say who it is, let's say it's a large software publishing company that specializes in making PC operating systems, called me and said, look, I want you to do some research, find out what the law is by tomorrow morning. Pretty straightforward stuff, but don't use Westlaw or Lexis, the two big tools you normally use for this. And I said, oh, great. It's 1999. Everything is somewhere on the web. I'll go find whatever service everybody else uses, and I'll go do this research. 4 hours of unproductive searching later, I said, I'm so ticked off about this. I can't find one. I'm going to break down and use Lexis. But in the process, I think I could probably do better. I think somebody needs to build this kind of big third service. Somebody needs to crack this duopoly. There's a lot dumber people raising a lot more money to do a lot stupider things in 1999.
Yes, there were. So why didn't they want you to use LexisNexis?
So here's the thing. The way the market is structured is law firms buy these contracts with Westlaw and Lexis, but they pass the research costs through to their clients, right, like Microsoft. So in that year, these kind of big corporate clients would pay $20, $30, $40 million in pass-through costs, right? So they basically just said, structurally, we're not going to do it anymore. And it's taken about 10 years and 2 collapses of the economy to do it, but now clients of law firms say, look, we're not paying for that anymore. That's your overhead. We don't pay to put the books on the shelf, right? We're not going to pay to put it on your computer either. Turns out the mortgage crisis is a huge opportunity for my firm. Now it's actually more than 500,000 paid subscribers around the world. So
Ed, you're a lawyer practicing law, and you say, I can do this. With your deep technology background and your deep business background, what were the early days of Fast Law like, Fastcase?
Well, so you're talking about the traits of entrepreneurs, right? And here's one of the most important ones, I think. Something that has been a curse of mine my entire life. I call it the curse of concurrent anachronism, right? You walk around after a storm hits the area, and a tree falls and knocks over a power line, ruining the neighborhood's power for a week, right? And 99% of the world's people walk by and say, what a terrible tragedy. And one person walks by and say, it's 2010. Why on earth are we running power lines above ground? Right? So let me get this straight. The business model is that we're going to run these through every neighborhood. And every time a storm comes through, which happens several times a year, a tree is going to fall down and knock down one of these power lines. That's the business model. This is crazy. How am I going to explain this to my son? When he looks back at pictures from this time and sees these above ground power lines, he's going to say, wait a minute, you guys flew across the world in airplanes, but you couldn't run the power lines below ground? Concurrent anachronism. You see stuff like this everywhere in your life, and you say, well, that's not how it's going to work.
Thank you. Tony, will you tell us a little bit about your story?
Yeah, so I am definitely the accidental entrepreneur. When I left business school, I went to work for American Airlines, and I was there for 2 years, and it was fun. But after 2 years, I was like, oh my gosh, I am ready to do more. But I had to wait my turn. And so I didn't really want to wait. And so I had read a book, and it talked about people who want to do more and looking to take on more to go work for smaller companies. So I went to a $250 million a year company, which to me sounded small compared to American Airlines, and it did turn out. I was able to do a lot more. They asked me to run their aviation business unit after I was there for a year, and so it was my first exposure to true general management, and I absolutely loved it and had a lot of fun. After a few years, I said, okay, I'm going to go back to California, that was home, and got involved with a couple of early internet-based companies, and went through the whole cycle of, oh gosh, raising money, oh my gosh, the money ran out, well, what are we going to do? Fortunately, we found a buyer. So it sold, and so I had a little bit of time, a little bit of money, and said, okay, now I'm going to start my own business. And I had started off my career in software development, so I was kind of looking at high-tech stuff, and nothing really resonated with me. I had a very specific business model in mind, and that was that of recurring revenue. Because when I went to American Airlines, I was responsible for revenue. Okay, that's fine, I understand that. Well, every month, the calendar reset to zero. The calendar reset to zero. It's like, holy smokes, I got to start climbing that hill again. And when I was at IHS, we had a subscription model. And so once you had a sale, that revenue kept coming in. It didn't reset at the end of the month or the end of the quarter. And so I really wanted that business model to try to minimize the risk of starting a new venture. Well, what fell into my lap was a friend of a friend who comes and said, hey, Tony, why don't you look at what I'm looking at? And it's medical waste. I'm like, medical waste? Heck, I don't even know what happens with my garbage at home. What the heck happens with medical waste? And so I looked into it. I did a little bit of research. So I was definitely there at the causal effect. And so I did a little bit of research. And I said, hey, this is a market, and there's definitely a need for a big player in California. And it's funny, to what you said, this person who wanted to start the business worked for the world's largest medical waste business, and he wanted to have one little truck doing his little thing. And I looked and I said, oh my gosh, are you kidding me? Here's an opportunity to really go out and build a big, strong number 2 in the state of California, which just happens to be the world's most profitable medical waste market. So off we go. 3 plants later, trucks all over the place, just this big, humongous operation. And it grew like wildfire, so from 2002 to 2006. Then we had a couple of people come knocking on our door. Not only the big player, Stericycle, but a couple of hazardous waste companies. So here we are, doing our tens of millions of dollars of revenue, and you have these hundreds of millions and billion-dollar companies come knocking on your door, and you get a little nervous. You say, oh, what do you want to talk about? And so, after some round and round, we ended up selling. And so that's sort of how I got into entrepreneurship. So what am I doing now today? Took some time off, and then I started a medical billing and practice management business. And so that's been up and going, and we've been growing it, and it hasn't quite taken off as quickly as I would have anticipated. But then just within the last year, something that was more near and dear to my heart came up. And so now I'm involved in an education business, so it'll be online and mobile-based. And I won't say too much about it because we're getting ready to go into final testing. We'll probably launch in February. But that's going to be geared to K-12 education.
So from aviation,
Yeah.
software,
Yep.
waste management, medical billing, education. Why do you think, as an entrepreneur, you can jump industries like that?
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, some of the things you're talking about, oh my gosh, some of that is definitely me, and some of it isn't. Don't get me wrong. I don't think I'm one of those great ones. But
Actually, I think you would qualify.
I do not have a fear of the unknown. I just think I can figure it out. And I know I don't have all the answers going in. But I know that I can figure it out. And I know that I can build a good team around me, and together we're going to figure it out. And guess what? That's exactly what has happened. I mean, if you're thinking you need to have all the answers, it's never going to happen. You're never going to get started. And so my whole career has been, once I'm kind of set in one industry, lo and behold, I go into a new one. Don't know why, but I do. Well, I do know. I do like the excitement and the rush. I do get a big rush out of it.
You think entrepreneurship's a little addictive?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you. Chen, can you tell us your story?
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you guys having me in here since I'm not an alum. But I see Aaron Stopak standing up there. I want to thank Aaron for introducing me to the group, and this is my second time here, and hopefully not the last. My parents are both immigrants, so they came in from outside the country, and my dad's from China, my mom's from Malaysia, and I grew up not knowing anything but having your own business. So I was brought up in an environment where I started working when I was 11 or 12 in my dad's Chinese restaurant, and a great experience. I learned all about hard work and what it takes. I saw him and his dad working nonstop, and I got to understand what it's like to take care of difficult customers, and to be it taught me great sensitivity to making sure your customers are happy. I had 3 businesses in college, and got a real job for a couple years in commercial real estate, and I kind of ditched that when the market went under. The recession hit in the late I guess it was around 1990, 91. I started CyberRep, which is the company that I wound up building for 12 years and successfully exiting a few years ago. And then after I sold CyberRep, I became an angel investor, invested in about a dozen different companies, and one of the companies that I invested in or acquired with my partners, I'm now running. It's called Lore Systems, which is enterprise network engineering, cloud computing, infrastructure as a service type stuff. And the reason we bought the company was because we thought there's tremendous growth potential in cloud computing and virtual private servers, and we also felt there was a lot of potential with government contracting, being here in Washington, and also with the market, with the DoD and all the other government agencies moving to consolidate data centers. We thought that would be a great area to play in.
Chen, I just lost my question. That happens from time to time. So your parents always had businesses. Do you think that that's, and we know that in entrepreneurship, a lot of immigrants start businesses when they arrive at a new country. Do you think that's an advantage to just thinking you're always going to have a business?
What's the advantage, growing up like that? Or, yeah, I do. I think, but I don't know any different. It's like talking to somebody from Eastern Europe who grew up under a communist regime. They don't know any different. That's your life. My dad he came here to go to college. He left communist China in '49, went to Hong Kong, then came over here, got his degree in engineering in New Jersey. Worked for a few years at Bendix doing aircraft engines, and then just decided to ditch it all and start his own restaurant. I don't know why. I never asked him why he did that, but I didn't know any different. I just grew up in a Chinese restaurant, so that was my upbringing. So
I'll
tell you that the lesson of hard work, though, is a great lesson, because just watching him and his father set this example for our family was, I look back on it now, and it was quite a, it's sort of like the hours that I work are really not as hard as those guys were working. So it's kind of, it's kind of funny, but now I'm not afraid of hard work. That's the key thing, and I think you really, for me, maybe it's a fault, but when I hire people, I really look for that work ethic too.
The reason I asked that question is because one of the cultural factors that influences levels of entrepreneurship throughout the world is whether or not leaving a job to start a company is an acceptable career path, or whether it's looked down upon to give up a job to start a company. And so you having been raised in a family where your father did that gave you permission when you were working to say, I think I'll start my own thing.
Yeah, I always knew I would have my own business. I didn't know what business I would be in. I could have probably picked a number of different opportunities. But you're right, I didn't have any qualms about quitting my real job and starting my own business.
So you also said that after you made some money selling your business, one of the things you did was become an angel investor. And I know that all of you here at the table have also helped other entrepreneurs, either through formal investing or informal investing. Why do you think so many successful entrepreneurs are angel investors?
For me, it was more, I missed the action. I think that's part of it. I really like being around high energy, high performance, passionate people that are obsessive about their customers, and I kind of like being with people like that. So to invest in their companies and be able to spend time with them was exciting for me, and it still is. So maybe that was something. And then when I bought Lore, I wasn't initially running it, but as the recession hit and we had to close offices and lay some people off and some hard decisions, I came in and started running the company, and I kind of realized I missed the action of running a business. So even though I like investing, I love building a business more.
So coming out of an academic environment, we're all well-educated, problem-solving people, and then we start a business, and we find out that there are all kinds of things that we know nothing about. So what was the biggest surprise from an execution or operations perspective for each of you?
I can speak for myself. So I think the biggest surprise to me is how little the middle steps mattered. Like when I was growing up, I kind of always thought that opportunity would come from the people who achieved at a high level kind of every step of the way, right? You do really well in college and you go to a good graduate school and you kind of line all this stuff up and you have to like hit every gate all the way down the mountain. You got to do it exactly right. And if you do that, maybe, just maybe, things will work out great. And in business, I've met all these people who are very, very successful who didn't do any of that. Zero, right? In fact, it's almost inverse proportion. The better educated people are, the more like kind of paper credentials they have, the fewer the instincts they seem to have about running their businesses. And in fact, a lot of the people that I've hired in operations or who've been very successful really have their PhD in street smarts. You know, people who just know how to get it done. And that's not to knock people with great academic credentials. There's also just a lot of smart people that I've met who have been very successful who have gone that route. But I think the surprising thing is that, you know, the things that it takes to be successful, maybe the kind of entrepreneurial DNA, doesn't correlate very strongly with that kind of, you know, academic track. And it certainly doesn't require that you do every step along the way right. You can screw up over and over and over and over again and then be hugely successful. My cousin Trey in Louisiana is like the living legend for this. This guy was a screw up his entire life. He messed up everything he touched. He got drunk every single day he was in college, at the crappiest college you could imagine. He got fired from every single job he ever took. And then one day, he just met this helicopter mechanic who seemed like a good guy. And he said, you know what? Let's start a business together fixing helicopters on the Gulf Coast. Right before a series of horrific disasters on the Gulf Coast that required a lot of helicopters to fly out of oil rigs and fix things. Trey could buy and sell everyone in this room like a dozen times. Maybe not these two guys, but he could buy and sell me a dozen times over. Trey was a screw up from the word go. But he had that entrepreneurial DNA. I can't fault him for it.
I'm going to say, don't try this at home. Statistically speaking, Ed, having a professional degree actually does correlate with higher levels of entrepreneurial success. Both more likelihood that your business will succeed and higher earnings when it does. So I'm happy for Trey, but I'm not recommending that. And for those of you who were worried that perhaps your booth education was a waste, let me put that to rest. Tony, what surprised you the most?
Operationally, was it?
Yeah, execution.
All the little things. So, you know, I was, again, big corporate guy, and so you kind of know a little bit about business. And then when I had my first GM role, okay, you know, I got sales and marketing and so forth. But I didn't have to deal with payroll and a whole bunch of things like that, you know, licenses and permits. And medical waste, as you can imagine, is very, very heavily regulated. So we knew we had to go get state permits. It's just we didn't realize the time, the cost, and then just all the little precursors. So to get the state permit, the local authorities have to sign off on it. And the local authorities say, medical what? You want to do what? Here? And so then it's like, oh my gosh, I have to actually educate these people on what I want. And so just things like that that you don't plan for. Yeah, I know I had to do permitting. I didn't realize I had to educate folks on the permits as well. And it just chews up a lot of time because every month you're paying rent on your facility. Your trucks, well, at the time we didn't have trucks, but you know, nothing can happen. Nothing can happen, but you have to have a physical facility because that's what they permit. They don't just say, hey, here's your permit, walk around and there you go. And so every month I'm writing a check thinking, oh my gosh, this was the dumbest idea I ever had. But, you know, the key is what Ed was talking about. You really have to know how to get things done. And people call it persistence and you know, a lot of different things. It's that, but really it is something in the DNA that you just figure out how to get things done. So once we learned, oh my gosh, we got to go educate these folks. Guess what? I was down at the county offices almost every day. I was taking people to lunch, I was educating them, and then I introduced the state folks to the county folks. And I had them come down and meet in our building. We had this big 10,000 square foot building that had a card table and 2 fold-out chairs. That's all we had because we didn't have the money to put the rest of the equipment in. But I got them all there to look and then see what we were trying to do and understand the process. So then the county could say, great, you got your permit, and then the state could say, okay, you got your permit.
Great story. Tony, I just want to remind you we're recording, so try to get a little closer to the mic. Jen, how about you? What surprised you the most?
The biggest lesson for me was, and I didn't learn it fast enough, was the absolute importance of hiring great people. I mean, people talk about it all the time. The problem with hiring great people when you're an entrepreneur and you have no budget is you don't have the money to pay great people. And what I realized after a few years of cyber rep, we had a lot of people that were earning less cash and more stock options, but I wasn't getting that high-level person. We finally brought one person in, paid them a little bit more, paid them a lot more than we could afford, and it turned out they could do multiples of what a couple of these other mid-level people could do. And the light bulb went off, and we started hiring people that we thought we couldn't afford before. And these are the people that got us to the next level and made us successful.
So I want to dig into that a little bit more because Professor Wortman and I have been doing some research on what angel investors and VCs find that their entrepreneurial teams are the least prepared for. Number 1 on that list is the challenge of selling, and I'll come back to that because that's an important one. But number 2 on the list is building teams. Mm-hmm. I'm going to ask you the hard question now. How? How do you hire great people? How do you identify them? Not everyone who has a great resume is cut out to work in an entrepreneurial environment. So have you had any great insight into how to identify great people in the hiring process? Jan, I'll let you start.
Well, yeah, I think we learned the hard way. I mean, I had a company with over 2,000 employees, and believe me, we churned through a lot of people because we had a pretty high demanding environment there. And we learned the hard way to find certain people. And I think the first thing starts with your corporate values, your company values. And we had a top 10, and we still have a top 10. And those are values like customer goals are our goals, attitude is everything, hard work, urgency, communication, go on and on about it. But, you try to match up when you meet people and interview them, try to see, do they have this value set that you guys have? Because if they don't, they're not going to fit in. So you really try to get that match. I mean, there's a lot of smart people out there. There's a lot of people with degrees out there. There's a lot of people with 10 years of experience in ABCD out there. But it's hard to find people that have sort of the values. And I'd rather take someone who's a cultural fit and teach them the business than take someone who's got all the stuff on paper, but they're not a cultural fit. We've been through it a lot. But even so, I think, and Jack Welch would probably corroborate this, you still are going to miss 1 out of 3 times that you hire. So, if we bat, if we have 2 out of 3 successful hires, we think that's successful. But it's still a crapshoot.
It's very painful.
Yeah, definitely.
You guys want to comment on that as well, the building of the team?
Yeah, it is. It is definitely one of the most important things. I think the 3 most important things are 1, getting things done, 2, building the team, and 3, selling. It's funny that you mentioned that. In terms of building the team, there's no way on earth that myself and my co-founders could have done what we did on our own. It's just physically impossible, absolutely impossible. And we knew that going in. And what's funny is we built this HR manual and did all this stuff for hiring people in advance. And I remember thinking, how many startups do this? That's really kind of a waste of time. But it was so important to us to make sure that we identified some core values and what we were going to look for in people. And thank goodness that we did that, because we went through a ton of folks. We did. You get smarter as you go through the process. But the little trick that I ended up using is I would put folks into day-to-day situations, kind of like the case method for consulting firms. And I'd say, here's the situation that we're facing. And I would just see where they went. And we looked for the folks that could get it done. And we found them.
And you actually had to go from an environment of managing white-collar professionals to building a team that's an integration of white-collar and blue-collar. And was that challenging?
Yes, it was in a sense. I found that I had to spend a lot more time with folks to buy into what we were doing, to really get them excited and to see what we could do, because these folks were used to 8 to 5, I'm in, I'm out. A lot of them had come where they punch the clock, in and out. Whereas in the white collar, folks would stay a little bit longer. I mean, in the office environment where I was, folks didn't quite leave right at 5 o'clock. They stayed till 6 or 7. But in the blue collar environment, that wasn't really the norm. And we were requiring them to stay extra and do work. And we paid them for it. Don't get me wrong. We paid them for it. But we needed them out there doing the best work, and they were really the face of the company. I'm thinking of our drivers in particular. They were the face of the company. The hospital saw these drivers. The doctors saw these drivers. And if that was a bad experience, we were getting the phone calls. So that is where we went through a lot of folks, and that is where we spent a lot of time training. And it was a little challenging, and it was a little trial and error until we got something right.
California is a pretty strong union state. Did you run into any union issues?
We did not run into union issues, but we did run into folks who had worked for unions before. So that was tough, and that's where we had a lot of issues. And some folks made it, and others didn't. And there was one guy, it's funny, his nickname was Baby Shark. And he came from this environment, and I just saw something that he was going to be my top guy. And my partner was like, I don't know. He's from this union shop, and we're going to have some issues. And it turned out he was our best guy. I mean, we went into new areas. We went to Northern California. He went up there, and he was our lead guy. We went to Southern California. He went down there, and he was our lead guy. And he really then set the tone for all of our hires in the other parts of the state.
Ed, this is so important. I want you to have a chance to comment as well.
Yeah, just a couple of thoughts about this. The first is we learned pretty early on that one great employee is better than 10 good ones. That's just especially true in software, right? One great employee will be much more productive than 10 good employees, even good ones, not just average ones. Maybe a corollary to that. We've always tried to hire slowly and fire quickly. I think you guys.
Okay, now wait a minute.
Right.
You're a lawyer. Firing quickly can be dangerous.
I'm a recovering lawyer. I'm 10 years clean and sober. So,
So how do you manage the process so that you have that wiggle room to fire quickly?
Well, one of the things we do when we hire people, we say, look, for every hire, there is a 3-month trial period. So you need to know you're going to work out or not in 3 months, right? And so we've had to fire people. I mean, you just get it wrong, right? I think that, how do you know the right people? It's a little bit like falling in love. I mean, sometimes you just know. But also like love, you can do it wrong in so many different ways, right? So I think it's also important to really know yourself, right? There are people in my company who just aren't very good reads of people, right? And consequently, we just don't trust them with hiring. It's not a personal thing. It's just, this is one of your skills. This is not one of your skills. You're not a good read of people. You don't make the call. And so I think that knowing yourself takes on both dimensions. One, make sure that you understand your values. Put them down on paper. Make sure that you're communicating it across the team, especially people who are hiring, right? And then also know yourself. If you're not a person who is a good read of people, don't try and read people when you're hiring them, right? And then maybe the last thing to say is, at the very early entrepreneurial stage, I think there's a tendency to be too skimpy with equity, especially for the right people. Now, you don't want to go crazy with this, and I think there's a lot of good research on this, but I think for the right people, your chief technology officer, for example, your kind of founding team, your can't do without team, the team that you really want to be your rock stars, your long-term core team, don't be skimpy. Make sure that their interests are aligned with yours and they're in it for the long haul. And it pays off over and over again. When money gets tight, they roll up their sleeves instead of bolting. They think about this in the long term. They think about it the way you do. And that's really important.
So I'm going to ask one more set of questions, and then I'm going to turn it open to the audience. So be thinking of questions you want to ask the entrepreneurs. But I really am very focused on this question of selling. In the very early days as an entrepreneur, I see Tien smiling, so I know I've hit something here. In the very early days, you have no brand awareness. Your infrastructure's probably not built out yet. Your product or service may not be fully robust yet. How do you make those early sales that are going to create the credibility to build the business? Ed, you want to start with that?
Yeah, sure. So actually a great story that makes this point. Early on, we're just getting Fastcase off the ground. And one of the people that we were talking to was, the former CEO of a big publisher in this space that had grown to like an $800 million publisher and sold it and took all the money and put it in a venture fund and was investing. And so he said, look, I'm interested. I'm going to invest. So I've seen your business plan. I've looked at the product. The prototype is nice and everything else. Seems to me like this is a sales marketing challenge, right? So show me your sales plan. Who's going to be selling this? And my business partner at the time said, well, you know, look, it's not really like that kind of thing. It's an internet thing, and people are going to buy it online. He politely said, hey, just hold on a second. So that doesn't exist, right? Selling is going to be your hardest challenge, and you need to figure that out right now. It's not like I'm not going to invest. I like you guys, and I think you're really onto something. But you need to stop right now and think really hard about how you're going to sell this. And it was the most important advice we got. Among lots of good advice. Focus on selling really, like, first and foremost. Wake up selling. I mean, you need to, you know, have coffee is for closers on your door, right? So for every entrepreneurial business, I feel like there's a strong impulse to go hire salespeople or hire a VP of sales or hire someone who's sold in the industry. It's an illusion. I'm telling you right now. If you are starting a new business, all of your sales, all of your first sales are going to be made by you.
Oh my God, Ed,
Yep.
Right.
I could not have said it better myself. I mean, I preach this in my class. It's great to hear it from the entrepreneurs.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely true. We grew without any full-time salespeople, and you would think that was crazy because I came from an organization where we had, I don't know, like 100 salespeople across the country, and I thought, oh my gosh, we're going to need these salespeople. Thank goodness I know about sales. And as we got into it, I thought, holy smokes, I can't afford salespeople. And so even if I paid on commission only, it might be a little tight. So we ended up doing all the selling on our own. And we did a lot of direct mail and got fantastic results to direct mail. And we were a little lucky in that the larger accounts put it all out to bid. So it was a competitive bid. Once they knew you were out there, you were going to get invited. So that kind of made it a little bit easier. So we completely retracted from, okay, eventually we're going to hire salespeople to, no, we didn't hire them. And it is the best thing that ever happened to us. Otherwise, we would have just put a lot of money down the drain, and I know we wouldn't have picked up any sales because it's an animal where folks knew what medical waste was if they're in the industry. They knew they had to have someone do it. And it was just all about, what are you going to do for me in terms of service? Because I've had such a horrible experience. I need to hear what you're going to do differently. And no one could preach that better than my business partner and I.
Passion sells, right?
Yeah.
And even the best sales rep isn't going to have the passion about your business that you do.
Tony, Ed, how long did you remain in the primary sales role before you did start to build an organization?
Yeah. I stayed in it for 12 months.
11 years and counting.
So you don't have salespeople today?
No, I'm just saying, like,
Okay.
even though we have Salesforce today, like, I'm selling. You know, I get out there all the time. I answer the phone like probably 10 times a week to take inbound calls just to make sure I'm staying close to the experience. You know, like, you never take the sales hat. As far as I'm concerned, you never take the sales hat off.
Ken?
I'm with Ed on that. In fact, I'm still in sales, and I brought some brochures. If anybody's, if you guys think I'm kidding, I'm not. If you guys are interested in lore system services, I'm here to sell. No matter what, I'll always be the chief salesperson. I know guys I have some friends that are running fairly large public companies, you know, over $1 billion in market cap. These guys go on sales calls. Jack Welch goes on sales calls. They all go on sales calls. I mean, that never stops. I mean, I feel bad for the engineer that kind of built this great product who's not a natural salesperson. But at the end of the day, they have their title on the card saying CEO, and you know that means a lot to that's your brand promise to a customer. So I totally subscribe to the school of, you know, you're always selling. You're never not selling, really.
So how many of you have professional sales experience on your resume? Have carried the bag, closed the deal, brought in the revenue? How many of you would like to have it on your resume at some point? Okay, the rest of you? Probably not entrepreneurs. That's fine. If everyone was an entrepreneur, there would be nobody to work for the entrepreneurs.
But I would say something, though. I think if you don't have formal sales training or sales experience, that doesn't mean you can't be a great salesperson. I think if you really believe in your idea or your solution or your product or whatever, and the authenticity and the sincerity of your belief in that product will show through to a customer. So and you can also develop that internal confidence to be able to go out and make a sales call.
Absolutely.
So I don't think that it's a lost cause, but maybe
if
the
they
odds
didn't
are
raise their
against them
hand that they
initially.
wanted to sell,
Yeah.
that's all I'm saying. Do you guys have questions for the entrepreneurs? No, seriously. All right.
When it comes to hiring good people, Tony, you said you went through, and this is for everyone, you went through a trial and error kind of experience. How did you go about actually determining what the error was and how to correct it?
So because we're taping, I'm going to kind of summarize the questions, but correct me if I'm wrong. Bill asked, when you're doing a trial and an error process, especially around hiring, how do you identify the error? How do you learn from the process? Tony?
Yeah, the error there was, folks didn't work out. And they didn't work out for, the main reason was the hard work. I mean, when you're getting started, everyone is putting in a lot of hours. And so the trial and error there was like, gosh, we tried this person, he or she didn't work out. And what we ended up doing was modifying our process, our interview process. And that's where we came up with the case method. And it didn't take long to get there. But quite frankly, up front, we really didn't know what the situations were. Once we were in operation a little bit longer, we said, oh, heck, we faced this situation today. What would you do in this situation? That sort of thing.
So how do you pick the right equity investors? And if you could give kind of a experience, if you can share it with just dealing with some difficult board issues.
How many of the three of you have actually had equity investors involved in founding, in starting your... Okay, so all three of you. So the question is, how do you pick the right investors, and what's it like to relate to the board?
Friends and family. I did not take on any institutional money. I talked to some folks, and in the end, I didn't like the price. So I stuck with friends and family. So that made it a little easier.
We took institutional money from Allied Capital, which is no longer in business, but it's not because of us. we made them quite a bit of money, but we picked them over GE Pension, which was very interested in investing in my company, as were some other venture capital firms. We picked them because they were local, and their chairman came and closed the deal. So, he got involved, and some of the players that were on our board were neighbors. They lived within a 5-mile radius of us. So we had a very good feeling chemistry-wise. I think when you pick an investor, if you have a good idea, you'll have a lot of money chasing you. So it's not the win is not to take money. The win, and I don't even think it's to take money at a great price, because we didn't take the best price we could have gotten. It's really about the partner, like a marriage type thing. You're going to marry this investor, and you're going to go through good times and bad times with this investor. So what I did was I got 10 references from Ally, and I called every one, and I found 3 or 4 of them that had actually had issues, and I said, how did they treat you when you had some financial problems? And that was what kind of said, oh, wow, they're actually partners. So that's how I did it. I actually did a little market research, counterintuitively to your thing, but I think it was luck, though. We got lucky with a really good investor.
Yeah, I would just say I think Tien's absolutely right about checking references. If like the most important thing is talk to other companies in the portfolio and really ask them about that investor. But I would say even beyond that, one of the most important things is you've got to understand how their business works, right? Maybe a GSB alum group doesn't have this problem quite so much. You probably have friends who are working in funds and understand the dynamics of it a little bit better. But I think a lot of entrepreneurs don't, right? So you need to understand things like how much money is raised in the fund and where they are in investing it, right? Their general partners who have invested in them. They're entrepreneurs too, right? What's their business look like? Like how short of a turnaround have they promised their LPs are going to get return on their investment, and what kind of returns have they promised? How's the portfolio going? Is there a lot of pressure for home runs right now at the end of it, or can they hit a couple of doubles and do really well? So you really have to understand their business too, right? You have to kind of sit in their shoes and think about the dynamics that make a venture fund or an equity group really go. And then you need to understand how your company fits into that and whether it's worth your time and effort. Because you are getting an investment, right? You're sort of getting cash, but you're buying it with stock. So you need to be a consumer too, right? Just like you're investing in them, they're investing in you. Just being a smart, informed investor.
So part two of that question I think is really important because I know several entrepreneurs for whom this was a big challenge. How do you manage, as the CEO, how do you manage your board?
I think you got to be open and transparent and honest with them. And part of it is if you select a partner that you feel like you can be open and honest and transparent with, it's not really an issue. But the board is there to help you. And in our case, the board really didn't get involved too much because we were making money for them. I think they were busy fighting fires on some of their poor performing portfolio companies. But when we went to sell the company, though, they were very helpful. When we bought a couple of companies, they were very helpful. So, but we had a pretty good board experience.
Great. We had a question back here.
This is related to the board question. They say sometimes it's lonely at the top. I'd be interested in knowing how you use mentors, how you use advisors, and how much of it is decisions that you're making on your own.
So the question was mentors and advisors. How much do you use them and how much is it lonely at the top?
It can be very lonely, no doubt about it. My business partner and I had a good relationship, so we could bounce a lot of things off of each other. And then I also had an informal advisory board, if you will, a couple of friends from undergrad, and I would use them a lot, and especially when we were doing our deal. Both of them had M&A experience, one with Goldman and one with Western Union. So going through that process was new to me, and so that's when I was really relying on them a great deal and getting information. But even throughout, just operationally, if things would come up, especially when we were expanding into new areas, because these plants aren't cheap to put in. So expanding up north and down south, so I'd kind of run some things by them. So it was nothing formalized to just pick up the phone and call them.
I think the harder question for a lot of entrepreneurs is not whether to have advisors or what kind of advisors to have, but it's when to listen. Because by the very nature of high growth opportunity entrepreneurs, a lot of times you're doing something that's never been done before. So nobody really knows, right? I mean, this is Waverly's point before. If you do a lot of market research, you would see like kind of one opportunity. But if you saw like a much bigger latent market, you would see a whole different one. And oftentimes, even well-meaning advisors will advise on, what people have done in the past. It's kind of a different form of market research. And so, there are times when you're facing the same kinds of issues that other people have faced. Employee turnover, or high costs, or dealing with a vendor, or how to get started selling. These are the kinds of experiences that I think are really great to have advisors who can help you. Sometimes there are vision things that have to do with what this market's going to look like in 10 years, or products that people haven't even imagined yet. And that's where it gets lonely at the top. I mean, there's no one who really sees that quite the way like an entrepreneur does, right? And even your best advisors can't say, yes, I think what Facebook really needs is email. I mean, what Mark Zuckerberg thinks or sees about that, there's just not a whole lot of people who can advise him. So I think it's a real challenge, knowing when to listen and when not to listen. I'll say most of the mistakes I've made were when I didn't listen, especially to good board members and good advisors who had been there and done that before. So for that whole class of things, lean heavily on your friends and pick them well.
Yes, ma'am.
I noticed there were a lot of women in the audience. You talked about 8% of entrepreneurs are successful. Do you know how that breaks down between men and women, and if you would have any special advice for women starting out?
I assume that question's directed at me. This is one of the great sadnesses of my life. 100% of the people that Sarah Sarasvathy found that met her criteria were men. That isn't to say that there aren't high-growth women entrepreneurs. It's that there are far, far fewer of them. A much, much smaller percent of women. Women entrepreneurs start businesses at about the same rate as men, but they tend to start businesses in the services industries, in the consumer industries where there are low barriers to entry, and they tend to start small businesses. And so one of the pieces of advice that I have for women is think bigger. The little consumer product that might work great at the boutiques could be a huge hit. The restaurant that you want to open could be the next fast casual chain that takes on the world, could be the next Starbucks. The services company could be scalable enough to actually generate national interest. Think outside of the low barrier to entry businesses. Think about the high tech, think about the medical field, think about industrial. Think about industrial. Tony made a lot of money in waste management, right? And women are dramatically underrepresented in those kinds of areas. Yeah?
I don't know if I can formulate this question, but I'm really intrigued with how much, what the psychology is behind putting your own money behind this. You guys are obviously committed into these things, and there's a passion issue, but there's also this financial commitment to it. I mean, any advice or suggestions in terms of how to handle that psychologically?
So the question is, what about putting your life savings at risk? How do you make it work?
These guys have probably much better guidance than I do on this. I did it exactly wrong.
Oh, Ed, we definitely have to hear that now. We want to learn from your mistake. Please share with us.
Yeah, okay. So I didn't know it was a mistake at the time. We started the company in November of 1999. So by the time we got our business plan done, we're ready to launch our prototype, it was April of 2000, and the biggest collapse the economy's ever seen, right, at least in the U.S., and especially toxic software companies, right? Anything that even touched the web was automatically a stupid idea, but as far as the eye could see, right? And just as things started to get a little bit better, the 9/11 attacks here retoxified not just the sector, but the entire region, right? And so we weren't able to actually raise money for our business until summer of 2002. So I went 2.5 years without a paycheck. I would not advise this, by the way, as a means of starting a company. Waverly was talking about, knowing where your kind of acceptable limit is, how much you're willing to invest. I went way beyond that.
I see a wedding ring, Ed.
Yeah. So I dug myself in the deepest hole I possibly could. I liquidated all of my retirement. I sold everything. I raised money from all the angels that I could during that period. I took out all the credit cards that I could and took on as much credit card debt as I could and invested it all into the company to make it go for 2.5 years. This is not, again, the suggested trajectory for starting a company.
Ed is absolutely right. This is absolutely, and venture capitalists will look at how over-leveraged you are and think of you as desperate. It makes you a less attractive investment target. So be aware of that. They want to see skin in the game, but they don't want to see desperation.
I don't want to see the bones, too.
So Ed, same wife?
Same wife. So I wasn't married at the time, and so that makes a big difference. I was single with no kids, and we actually believed in ourselves, and we made it go, in a way that was, in the end, kind of made it all okay. We made enough money, more than enough money to pay back all the debt and to restore the savings and to put everyone, my son, on a solid financial footing and everything else. But I think Waverly and most smart people would say, establish it ahead of time how much you're willing to invest based on the size of the opportunity. And when you get there, unless you really, really believe and you really, really are close to the opportunity, stop. I think most smart people would say, after 9/11 attacks, you don't have a paycheck and no good prospects for it, stop investing.
Okay, now, wait, I see a lot of hands jumping up, but I want to let the other gentleman comment because they may have done it differently.
I hope so.
I did it the same way. I was single, not married at the time, no kids, 50 grand in credit card debt. I didn't have savings to put in, but I had credit card capability. So my two partners and I each went into debt $50,000 apiece. And when I got married, I had a negative net worth. But I didn't even think about it. I just figured if I fail, I'll just get a job somewhere else. I'll just get another job. That was the thinking.
So the backup plan is there, right? And with his education and his experience, his opportunity costs, he had a backup plan. Tony?
I think the key is being single, because I too was single with no kids. And yeah, I put everything I had. I mean, I had a little bit of money from the software sale, the company I was working for before, and it all went into this business. And I'll tell you, it was hard on my business partner who was married and had 2 young kids. And we went 12 months without a paycheck. And his conversations with his wife were nothing I wanted to be a part of. And I tell you, to this day, I'm so glad it worked out because we're still friends, obviously. And his wife loves me now, hug and kiss and all this stuff. But at the time, I would not have any meals at that house because I don't know what was in the food.
Now, I saw a couple of people who were feeling very strongly they wanted to jump in.
I just was going to ask any of the panelists, I mean, what would have happened if you did draw the limit? I mean, if you said, if I go down this much, if I'm this much in debt, you know.
Have any of you, his question was about the limit. What if you hit the limit? Have any of you had to shut down a business that wasn't working? No? That's actually fairly unusual, and I have had to shut down a business that wasn't working. And I did actually draw the limit and reach the limit and have to tell the entrepreneurs that I was working with, we're done. What we have proven is that we create fabulous product that the market wants, that generates wonderful PR, that has terrible gross margins, that is difficult to manufacture, and we can't finance inventory. And we have proven this beyond a shadow of a doubt for me, and it is time to shut down. At which point, the entrepreneurs that I was working with said, thank you for your resignation, and screw you. 2 years later, they came back to me. They had lost several $100,000 more. They had proven that they make beautiful product, that the market wanted, that they could sell, that generated a lot of marketing interest, that had even worse gross margins, they had even more trouble with the manufacturing, and they definitely could not finance inventory. And they shut the business down. And 70% of businesses don't succeed, but particularly when you think about high-risk, high-reward businesses, there are going to come times when, for market reasons, for financial reasons, for timing reasons, for talent reasons, for regulatory reasons, the right thing to do is to shut down the business. And let me tell you something. Venture capitalists consider it a plus. They would much rather you learn those lessons on someone else's dime. So having a failed venture, particularly if you can articulate why it failed and what the lessons learned were, is actually a pro. And normally when I have a panel, 2 out of 3 have shut down a business that wasn't working. So this is a little bit of an unusual panel. Also, I've never actually had the situation where all 3 of them were single and went dramatically into debt to do it. So a little bit of an atypical panel.
If I could just add something to that. I think I won't speak for myself here, but when I look at Tony and Tiana, I can tell you what would happen if they reached that determination in a business, right? They would say, okay, I agreed to put in this much. We're there. There aren't near-in prospects of being successful at the way we need to make this go. So I'm going to stop. And what would happen is they would take that same kind of determination and fearlessness that they have shown up here and go start something else.
Exactly.
Right? I mean, they sort of have this, look, I don't really know how it's going to go. I don't have all the answers starting out, but I'm just going to go figure it out and make it go. And you sort of see that over and over again with them as serial entrepreneurs, and they'll just go do the next thing and make it go. And they'll take the same passion and the same determination, and now a little bit more know-how, a little bit more been there, done that. And they take those, experiences and make something else really successful, right?
No, I mean, if I had failed like Tien, I would have gone back and, gotten a job, and I would have been thinking, okay, what am I going to do next? Because I was hooked. I mean, I had the bug, and I knew that this one was going to succeed. But let's say it hadn't. I would have found a job and started saving and went after number 2.
Another question? All right, one last question.
How do you know when a business is ready to sell?
Excellent question. 2 of you have had exits. So how do you know when a business is ready to sell? An entrepreneurial friend of mine once said, you never know when it's too soon, but by golly, you know when it's too late. Tien?
Yeah, I had a couple friends that had slightly sub $100 million offers for their companies, and 2 different companies in my industry, actually, and they both wound up with zero because they either lost a big customer or the market turned against them. For us, it was a matter of we were in the CRM call center business, so we had 9 centers around 6 states across the U.S., and I was on the road an ungodly amount of time, and I had 3 young kids at home. And I think although we paid ourselves nicely, we hadn't really paid ourselves an exit kind of amount of money. So my partners and I decided to, the trend was towards the Philippines and India, and I was just thinking, God, do I want to raise another $20 million and build centers in India, and then I'm going to I'll wind up with a divorce or something, you know. So my partner and I were in the same boat in terms of our kind of same age, same place in life, and we said, well, you know, we've done really well here, and we don't want to go overseas. Let's just sell it to a company that is either already overseas or has the resources. And we've hired an investment banker, and they got us a great price, and it was it. So it was more of a personal decision. It wasn't timing the market. It was, you know, we really worked our asses off for 12 years, and you know, we just figured this has been a great run. Let's close it out and then try something else. So
Great.
More of a personal decision.
Tony?
As I said before, we had potential acquirers come to us. And so once we got the first phone call and had the first meeting, just kind of exploratory, then we went back and talked about, okay, are we ready to get out or not? And we were tired. I mean, it was hard. And we were thinking, gosh, is it too early? In retrospect, it was about the right time, maybe a year early, but we were ready to cash out. And the offers were good. I mean, they were better than anything we would have imagined at the time. And we were lucky because a couple of companies that were big outside of the medical waste industry were looking to get into medical waste. And so we just hit it at the right time. So we thought, wow, when is this going to happen again? Because if they don't come and get us, they'll start on their own. Then we got more competition, and we really lost our leverage where we can have a pretty good deal. So it was just nothing planned. It just came to us.
So Ed, do you think about that with Fastcase?
Yeah, we've actually had a number of people who have approached us with an interest in buying. And I think that for an early stage company or a fast growth company, the thing that you really think about outside of the kind of personal life stage things I think normal people think about too, you also think about the stage your business is in. And I really think about it in terms of maturity. You know, there's a time before which you haven't really done anything yet. You know, you've got a prototype but you haven't really sold, or you haven't really reached your market potential in any way. That's obviously not a good time to sell. There'll be people who want to buy there and kind of get some sort of, you know, discount on the value of the enterprise. Obviously, bad time to sell. Then there's a fast growth period. If you're doing well, you know, you're growing at a good clip, right? You've achieved something. You've got real operating capital. You've got, you know, positive cash flow. You're growing at a healthy rate. You're getting some recognition in the market. That can be a good time to sell. But I think the point that you really want to look for to maximize is when your business starts to plateau a little bit. And especially if you can tell before it starts to plateau, you can read the market and really understand it. I think that's the point where you really look towards selling it, when you feel like those sales are going to start to stall out. Because after that point, once you've sort of plateaued and things flatten out a little bit, you lose all the premium, right? When companies buy, they want to buy a company that has a pretty sharp growth trajectory, and they can take that and continue that trajectory. Once it starts to flatten out, I think people lose that interest. So it's kind of like buying or selling a house. You're kind of looking for, like, you know, that right curve in that growth curve.
One clue to look at is the percent growth rates, right? Going from 1 million to 4 million is 300% growth. Wonderful, right? As you get bigger and bigger and bigger, those percents come down because it's harder to double a $100 million company, and it's really hard to double a $500 million company. So that's a kind of a clue. When you start to see yourself approaching more industry normal growth rates, you may be hitting that plateau that Ed's talking about.
And same thing with growth profits, not just net revenue, right? But what are the profits doing? Are the profits expanding? Are you able to start achieving some, you know, kind of incumbent level like premiums for your service? Or are they actually declining? Is it a sign that your market is becoming, you know, more competitive or more saturated or more difficult to sell into, and your prices might actually have to go down? that's another sort of sign that I think entrepreneurs should watch out for as their profits begin to, they stop growing and they start to flatten or even tail off a little bit. Maybe starting to get too late. So you got to watch all those things very carefully, I think.
Well, I think that's all we have time for, so let's thank the entrepreneurs for joining us.
And let's thank Professor Deutsch for a lovely evening.